All right, let's jump right into this explainer. When we think about April 15th, 1912, we almost instinctively picture this unavoidable act of nature, right? Like a tragic, totally unpredictable clash between man and an iceberg out in the frigid Atlantic. But today, we're going to completely reframe history's most famous shipwreck. By digging into the data, the timelines, and the actual decisions made that night, we're going to see this not as a simple accident, but as a deeply tragic and entirely avoidable cascade of human error. We're starting off with a pretty haunting question, because as we break down the source material today, this is the reality that historians and maritime experts find the most frustrating. Over 1,500 souls were lost to the ocean. But the sheer, agonizing truth of that night, it didn't have to be this deadly. The massive loss of life wasn't a guarantee the second the ship struck ice. It was, tragically, a choice.
So the absolute crucial point comes down to this: 2 hours. From the exact moment the ship's designer realized it was doomed, the Titanic took a full 2 hours to actually sink. 2 whole hours. In the world of emergency management, that is a lifetime. That's plenty of time to organize, evacuate, and literally save everyone on board, if you have the right equipment, the right communication, and if things haven't already gone horribly wrong at a systemic level.
So, to understand how everything went so wrong, let's look at Section 1, the illusion of safety. Picture this, an 882-foot floating palace, costing about $200 million in today's money. It was carrying over 2,200 dreamers, from millionaires to immigrants, and they all fundamentally bought into the White Star Line's marketing that this ship was literally unsinkable. But the fatal math of their overconfidence is just staggering. Out of 2,224 people, they only had lifeboat seats for 1,178. That leaves 1,046 human beings with absolutely no physical seat on a lifeboat. And the wildest part, the Titanic was actually following the law. The laws just hadn't caught up to ships of this massive size. Because the designers were so incredibly confident the ship couldn't sink, they only installed 20 lifeboats. They legally condemned over 1,000 people before ever setting sail from Southampton.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the 10-second collision.
Okay, picture an unusually calm, pitch-black night. The captain is pushing 22.5 knots, racing forward straight into invisible danger. See, without waves breaking against the iceberg, the ice reflects zero light. It's basically invisible in the dark. And the speed at which disaster strikes here is terrifying. At 11:40 p.m., the lookouts spot the iceberg with just 30 seconds to react. They reverse the engines, turn hard to port, but man, it is just too late. The collision itself lasted a mere 10 seconds. It was so gentle that a lot of passengers didn't even wake up. But that 10-second scrape tore a 300-foot gash below the waterline. Just 25 minutes later, the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, inspected the flooding, did the math, and gave the captain the devastating news: the unsinkable ship was going down. And the reason Andrews was so incredibly certain comes down to a terrifying number: 7 tons. That is the exact amount of freezing Atlantic water that was blasting into the hull of the Titanic every single second. The laws of physics, well, they don't care about your marketing, they don't care about what you believe, and they definitely don't care about pride. The ship was taking on water far, far faster than it could ever be pumped out. With the math completely undeniable, we hit Section 3, a fatal evacuation. By 12:05 a.m., the chaotic evacuation begins. But instead of urgent honesty, the crew chose to catastrophically downplay the whole thing. They didn't yell out that the ship was sinking. They calmly told passengers, get in the lifeboats as a precaution. This specific phrasing was a staggering human error. Think about it from the passenger's perspective for a second. The ship's electric lights are glowing warmly, the orchestra is literally still playing music on the deck, and you're being asked to step out of this luxurious environment into a tiny wooden boat dangling over a pitch-black, freezing ocean just as a precaution? Naturally, a ton of people flat out refused to leave. And the ultimate tragedy of that downplaying is totally devastating. A standard lifeboat had a capacity of 65 people, but because the crew was terrified of overloading the boats and snapping the ropes, and because passengers initially refused to board, boats were launching half empty. The final boat launched at 2:05 a.m., when panic was at its absolute peak, left carrying only 12 people. 12 people instead of 65. Precious life-saving spots were literally just wasted into the night. Which leads to Section 4, the final plunge. By 1:40 a.m., the bow is completely underwater and the stern rises vertically into the pitch-black sky. As the 1,046 people left behind fell or jumped, they met the stark, horrible reality of the Atlantic Ocean. The water temperature was exactly 32 degrees Fahrenheit, literally freezing. In water that cold, you don't measure human survival in hours, you measure it in minutes.
15 minutes to be exact before hypothermia completely shuts the body down. Survivors sitting in the lifeboats reported hearing screams for help that lasted exactly 15 minutes. And then there was just silence.
At 2:20 a.m., the massive ship broke in half and vanished beneath the surface, 1,503 dead. Only 710 survived. The SS Carpathia eventually arrived to rescue the people in the lifeboats, but for the vast majority, it was just too late. And you want to know what makes this tragedy even more infuriating? The SS Californian was sitting completely still just 10 miles away the entire time. But its radio operator had gone to sleep, and they never even heard the Titanic's frantic SOS signals. So we arrive at our final analysis, Section 5, a perfect storm of failures.
How do we even make sense of an event of this magnitude? Well, the iceberg was really just the spark. This disaster was actually the result of 5 compounded failures. First, extreme overconfidence in the ship's design made everyone careless. Second, a reckless priority on speed and schedule meant they completely ignored iceberg warnings. Third, woefully insufficient lifeboat laws made a total rescue physically impossible. Fourth, completely asleep communication lines meant a ship just 10 miles away missed the disaster. And fifth, massive human error during the evacuation left the very few lifeboats they did have half empty. You compile those 5 steps, and a damaged ship becomes a mass casualty event.
But you know, those 1,503 deaths were not in vain. The Titanic disaster shocked the world so profoundly that it sparked the absolute biggest maritime safety revolution in human history. Outdated capacity laws were entirely replaced by a strict mandate that ships must carry 125% lifeboat capacity. The complete lack of ice tracking resulted in the immediate creation of the International Ice Patrol, which is still operating today, by the way. And that sleeping radio operator? That directly led to laws requiring 24/7 uninterrupted radio monitoring on all large vessels. The Titanic fundamentally, permanently changed how humanity navigates the sea.
The unsinkable ship sank, but its hard-learned lessons definitely didn't. By breaking down the data, we really get to see a story of hubris, physics, and profound human error. So I want to leave you with this final thought. What detail from this explainer really stood out the most to you? Was it the fatal lifeboat math, that terrifying 15-minute survival window, or just the fact that salvation was sitting a mere 10 miles away? Think about how these compounded failures totally shape the safety regulations we take for granted every single day. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll see you in the next explainer.